Welcome to episode 2 of the People's Cardboard Podcast, a podcast about sports cards and sports cards collecting. I am your host, Seth LaRue. You can find me on Instagram and YouTube at Soccer Card Corner. And you can also find this podcast on Apple and Spotify by searching the People's Cardboard. Today, we are going to be talking about blue ocean strategies for sports card collecting. And before I dive into what blue ocean strategies are and how they apply to sports card collecting, I do just want to say thanks to everyone who provided positive feedback on the first episode, where I had Mad City Collector on to talk about the 2017 Topps Chrome Refractor Red auctions. If you haven't checked out that episode, I highly recommend it. A lot of inside baseball and just sort of what it was like, for him being part of these legendary auctions and thinking about how to allocate his funds. So I definitely highly recommend that episode. And yeah, I'm happy to be back with another episode. I think what I'm going to be trying to do is doing at least one of these episodes per week. It'll be some combination of solo episodes like this one or having an interview style podcast with a sports card collector to talk about a specific topic. So today I do want to talk about blue ocean strategies. And this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit as I try to think about my own PC. And I guess to maybe provide context or to position this conversation, the Stacking Slabs podcast is a podcast I listen to quite often. And the host, Brett, often talks about being the CEO of your own PC. And I love this because it really, really makes you as the collector accountable for what you're buying, what you're selling, what you're collecting. And not only are you accountable to that, but you also don't really have to answer to anybody in terms of, your collection decisions, because the whole point of being a sports card collector is to collect what you like and collect what you enjoy. And so I was thinking about this concept, and, I think for anybody who's starting a PC, it's often scary or overwhelming to think about what do I want to collect and why. I know for a while I was just buying and selling cards that I thought looked cool because I was like, oh, someday I'll have this awesome collection and then I can look and flip through all my cards and be like, wow, these are so cool. But in reality, what that did is it didn't really give me any sort of purpose or any sort of direction. And so I was buying cards that I thought looked cool, but then, a month later I was like, why do I have this card? And then I would want to sell it. And there was really no rhyme or reason for what I was collecting or what I was buying. And I think what that does is it, not really having a focus can sometimes make the hobby in general feel overwhelming and just not as fun. Whereas I think having more of a clear focus and a clear strategy really gives, at least for me, gives me as a collector an identity, right? It gives me something that I can think about and focus on and apply my energy towards. And so with that in mind, I started thinking about this idea of a blue ocean strategy. And, for context, blue ocean strategies, this idea of this concept of a blue ocean strategy really applies mostly to business and specifically entrepreneurship. And if you think about a blue ocean in the context of a blue ocean versus a red ocean, like a blue ocean is something where, there's not a lot of competition. You can kind of just fish in that ocean without worrying about having to compete with other fishermen, or, if you think about it from like a shark landscape, a blue ocean is sort of free of any other sharks where you're free to kind of swim about and go about your business. Whereas a red ocean, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of blood in the water, if you want to use the shark analogy. And from the context of a business, you can think of a blue ocean as like uncharted territory where businesses haven't explored or haven't set up or haven't ventured into, whereas a red ocean is sort of like the mainstream where all the established companies are. And so trying to break through in that would be, a very tall task and very impossible. And if we just use some examples from actual companies that existed here, you can think of companies like Netflix, right? Think about Netflix. Before Netflix came along, you had Blockbuster, in-person stores where people could rent videos and video games. Netflix came along and took all of that into streaming and basically created streaming. And Blockbuster is extinct now, right? Like there is no Blockbuster. Similar to Uber, before Uber, everyone used taxi cabs or, other similar forms of transportation. And now, you literally just use Uber. You call a car, they pick you up, they take you where you want to go. Before Uber existed, that concept was foreign. That concept didn't exist. Similar with Airbnb, you were traveling to a new country or a new city, you booked a hotel. Now with Airbnb, you can book a literal house and it feels more like a home. And it's in some cases or many cases cheaper than booking a hotel and has as many or more amenities. So these are the ideas of, before these companies came along, for Netflix, the red ocean was video rentals. For Uber, the red ocean was taxi cabs and other forms of transportation. For Airbnb, the red ocean was hotels. Each of these companies created their own lane by taking on a blue ocean strategy. And really what a blue ocean strategy is it's a strategy that focuses more on differentiation with existing incumbents or existing businesses and less about simply just cutting costs and racing to the bottom. If you think about how companies differentiate in a red ocean today where there's a lot of competition, ultimately it's a race to the bottom in terms of who can provide that product or service for the cheapest. In the case of blue oceans, you can still focus on providing a high quality product or service for a low cost, but because of the nature of the differentiation of your product or your business, there's less competition to worry about. So you really can focus on the differentiation and just the quality and then focus on driving down costs. So that's how a blue ocean strategy works in the context of businesses. And to take it a step further, the way you can think about this too is like, think about these businesses or like businesses that are able to succeed with this strategy. They effectively become verbs, right? So when we talk about calling an Uber, a lot of times you say like, oh, I Ubered there, right? Like I just Ubered to the airport, or yeah, I Airbnb'd a home when I went on my trip, right? Or like the whole Netflix and chilled, whatever, right? So it's like, another one is, think of a bigger company like Google, right? Like when Google started, the idea of like internet search was very, not very pervasive. Now you talk about things like you Google something, right? So this idea of basically creating a company or creating a lane in this blue ocean and then really becoming known for that lane, almost like a brand being built around that lane, right? So that's really like what a blue ocean strategy is. And then if we think very clearly about blue ocean versus red ocean strategy, blue ocean strategy is creating uncontested market space versus competing in an existing space, making competition irrelevant because there's less competition to worry about, versus a red ocean strategy where we're trying to actually beat competition, creating and capturing new demand. So in the context of a business like Uber, right, there's new demand now for people who want to call a car to pick them up versus exploiting existing demand. The idea here is that you're carving out your own lane, which by definition then makes, competition irrelevant because there is no competition in a blue ocean. So that's effectively what a blue ocean strategy is in terms of business. Now, if we think about what is a blue ocean strategy and how does it apply to sports cards, this is where I think it gets interesting. So think about all of the mainstream products, sets, players that people talk about or that people collect, right? You have Michael Jordan 86 Fleer, you have Mantle 1952, Panini Prism, NFL, NBA. Like just think of where the mainstream focuses in terms of collecting sports cards. Think of that as like the red ocean, right? There's lots of competition, there's great demand versus, relative to supply. Like Tom Brady rookies, there's a lot of demand for Tom Brady rookies, right? There's a lot of demand relative to supply for Michael Jordan rookies. That's why these cards are so expensive. Similar with a lot of the rare parallels that we think about from 90s basketball or even like Panini Prism Gold parallels. There's just a ton of demand for these things. And as a result, it makes it very difficult if you're trying to collect these things to do so. Like in general, it's hard to collect them. But even if you can find these cards, there's going to be a lot of competition. They're going to be really expensive. Now, if we think about niche players, niche sports, sets that maybe are a little bit off the beaten path, those are probably more akin to a blue ocean, right? There's less competition, more opportunity for someone to come in and really define their own collecting path. This is something, I mean, there's obviously a reason for why these sets or these players are in, less demand because, Tom Brady is the greatest football player of all time. Whereas if you take some random, offensive lineman, obviously he's not going to have the same collector base or same demand. So it's not to say that you have to just like pick a niche player for, a niche player's sake, but I'm just trying to sort of give a context around like what would a red ocean be versus a blue ocean in terms of sports cards, right? the real question, or the real, I think, value of thinking like this is like, okay, cool. How can you benefit as a collector from a blue ocean strategy? Like, how does it actually benefit you to think about sports collecting in this way, right? So basically, the way I think about it is you apply this blue ocean strategy to figure out your collecting lane. And I would ask yourself a number of questions that will help identify this lane. So the first one being, which sports players and sets, parallels, etc., are like the most collected by the mainstream? As we talked about, that'll help define, here's what the red ocean is, right? Brady's, Panini Prism, in the soccer card market, it's things like 2017 Topps Chrome, it's 2014 Prism, like, so, the main sets, Lionel Messi, the main players. Think about that for whatever, sports players, sets that you're interested in. Then ask yourself, which sports players, sets, parallels, etc., like which cards do you enjoy? Okay, that's one question. Make a list, think about that. Which cards can you afford? Obviously, like, yeah, everyone would enjoy a Messi gold prism, but like, can everybody afford a Messi gold prism? Probably not, right? That's fine. And then ultimately, I think there's also just asking yourself, like, which of these gives you like joy? Which ones do you just like, right? And if you think about the Venn diagram or the intersection of all those questions, that might be where your blue ocean is. Okay. And then to take that a step further, where that Venn diagram is, or where that intersection is, what are the rare and scarce cards that you might be able to focus on that could have potential long-term value, or at least would provide you an enjoyable chase when trying to build out your collection? And so by focusing on this and actually focusing your energy on collecting, a specific set or player or sport or combination thereof that is uncollected or less collected than the mainstream, this will help you carve out your own lane and really become known as like the go-to collector for that player. If you look on Instagram now, there's all sorts of player or set collectors or insert collectors that became known as, their brand is basically that they collect that person or that set or that parallel. You think of things like, there's people who collect specific NFL quarterbacks. There's people who collect specific soccer players. There's people who only collect galactic parallels. There's people who only collect certain insert sets from 2014 Prism World Cup, right? Like this, you can literally find almost a niche for like everything, right? And the point is that there's basically almost limitless possibilities in terms of what a new collector or a new PC could focus on. And I think the big key here is just that it be something that you enjoy. And then if you're also able to identify where the mainstream is maybe not looking, that provides this blue ocean for you that you can then, slide in and really carve out your own space. And I think this is important for a number of reasons. One, as I mentioned at the top, this might give you a real sense of purpose in this hobby. I think it's easy to kind of see on Instagram people collecting shiny things or cool things and feel a sense of FOMO, or just feel a sense of like listlessness where you're not sure like where you're going or what your, purpose is. I think having this lane and carving out this lane really can provide that sense of clarity and purpose. The other thing it does, especially over time, as you build up a collection and build up basically a brand around your lane, is it gives you a sense of authority, right? I'll just use an example. There's a collector on Instagram called Harry Kane Cards, and it's very obvious what he collects, and he's probably got the best Harry Kane collection I've ever seen. And when it comes to Harry Kane cards, I imagine he probably knows as much or more than pretty much anyone else, right? And there's a number of examples like this of people collecting those specific players, or people collecting specific sets that are probably the foremost authorities at those sets, right? And I think the other thing that this will do, which I know Brett talks about on Stacking Slabs, is by carving out this lane and then also sharing your lane with others and sort of building, I guess, a brand around this lane. It also makes you a magnet for your collection. So if people know that you're collecting a specific set because you're sharing it and you're focused on it, when they see cards from that set, they may reach out to you and say, hey, look, I saw this card. Do you have this one? Or hey, I have this card. Would you be interested in buying it? Right? Like they might actually come to you and, almost help you continue to build out your brand and build out your lane. So I think that's, at least from my perspective, or at least my experience, that's been something that I found extremely helpful in terms of enjoyment of the hobby, in terms of focus, and in terms of a sense of purpose. And, I think it just goes back to, you thinking back to think back to the Netflix and Uber examples where it's like, how does the hobby operate today? How do collectors operate today? What are people focused on? And if you look, if you want to collect Michael Jordan or you want to collect Tom Brady, I'm not telling you shouldn't do that. I'm just telling you that it's going to be much more competitive and much more difficult unless you obviously have, unlimited amounts of money. Then it's not going to be as competitive or difficult. But if you're someone like most of the hobby who's just trying to enjoy the hobby, collect cool cards, maybe doesn't have unlimited funds, collecting certain players or sets is going to be, much harder than collecting others. And so I would encourage anyone listening to this to really think about like what types of cards get you excited, what types of players, what types of sets, and then also think about like, are there any of those that maybe are slept on by the hobby or slept on by the mainstream, and where those intersect or where there's an overlap there, that's where I think there might be real opportunity both to build out a really awesome collection, but also to, like I said, carve out a niche and carve out a lane for yourself. So that's really all I have for today in terms of blue ocean strategy. Just a thought that I kind of had in my head for a while that I kept trying to apply, or I kept thinking about in the context of sports cards and thought it might be helpful to share. Let me know your thoughts. Always love to hear from people on this. Like I said, if you are listening to this on Apple or Spotify, you can also find the video versions of this podcast as well as other videos on the Soccer Card Corner YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to listen on Spotify or Apple, that's an option as well. But yeah, thanks everyone. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you tuning in. I will be coming back again next week with another collector interview, so stay tuned for that. And until then, I hope you're all doing well and take care. Bye.